Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Bridgett Massengill. Bridgett is the president and CEO of Thrive Regional Partnership, an independent nonprofit corporation dedicated to inspiring responsible growth across the 16-county tri-state region. Bridgett, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before we discuss how you went from wanting to be a lawyer to shepherding smart growth initiatives, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
My morning cup always has black coffee, and I do prefer flavored coffee, and I have found that not everyone does. Mm-hmm. So mine is a cinnamon flavored black coffee.
At least it's black.
It's black. It's black. I don't put anything in it.
What's your favorite flavor?
Cinnamon.
How about number 2?
Hazelnut.
Hazelnut.
Does that work?
If that works for you. I'm a black coffee guy, but I'm decaf.
Decaf?
Yeah.
What is the point?
Well, that's what everyone says, but I gave up caffeine a few years ago, and I just like the aroma of coffee. I like the flavor of coffee. I like the process. You know, it's a ritual in the morning, you know, although a lot of times we make the night before and it comes on automatically. So, you know.
But that's the ritual. When you hear the sound, It's time to get up and drink the coffee.
What was it, Folgers? The best part of waking up.
That's right.
It's Folgers in your cup. So how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Well, thank you for being here. We want to talk about your career path, and it's never a straight line, but I always like to start at the beginning. You were born in Nashville.
I was. If anyone knows Madison, that's where I was, just outside of Nashville.
Yeah.
And definitely a different place then than it was.
All of that is.
Than it is today.
It's another world. I don't think any of us recognize it.
That's right.
But you were able to move away from there.
That's right. So at 2 years old, my family uprooted and moved to Greenville, Tennessee. Beautiful, beautiful part of the country. We do call that God's country.
I had never been up in that area. And maybe it was 2 summers ago. Drove through there on the way to a golf trip in Virginia. It is beautiful. I think it's underrated.
Totally. And just like where we're sitting today in Chattanooga, sometimes we just don't really want to let the secret out.
Yeah.
And the secret, it is a beautiful place. My dad's remained there ever since.
I can understand that because, I'm 62 now and I moved here 25 years ago. And one, I didn't think I'd stay. I thought I'd be here 3 years. And as you get older and you start to think about retirement, and you got friends who, like I got a buddy who retired living in Chicago and moved to Tellico Village, or someone retires and they move to Florida. Last thing I want to do is move. I mean, I live in a great spot. Everything's convenient. My friends are here. Why do I want to go start over?
That's Dad. I mean, built the house when I was 9 years old, and he still lives in that house and loves it. And it sits on 13 acres of rolling hills, and he helps a buddy out, lets him have his cattle out there on the land. And he's retired now and just enjoys sitting there and having his cup of coffee on the front porch.
Nothing better.
Nothing better.
Sitting on the front porch or back porch, drinking coffee in the morning. As I told someone I was talking to earlier today, got up this morning, it was 62 degrees, sat on the back porch, had my coffee, and life was good.
Just amazing.
Yeah. In Greenville, you were there till what, 8th grade?
That's right. Yeah. So childhood, definite childhood memories are robust. And it's so interesting because some of the friendships that I made back then are some of the strongest today, even though we went our separate ways.
The ones in Greenville?
From Greenville.
Wow.
Those were the days that you kind of think about, is that even possible in today's day and age? But we lived out in the country And every summer, so here it is summertime right now, every summer we would get on our bikes and we would ride miles and miles on these back roads with our friends. Our parents had no idea where we were. They just knew we needed to be home by dark. Yeah. And people laugh about that today. And I'm like, that was my childhood. And we would just take off and be on these back roads. And, it's just baffling to think of.
Well, and that's where ignorance is bliss.
That's right.
Because you didn't have a cell phone. They couldn't track you. You couldn't call in. It was just like, Bridget's out riding her bike. And unless I hear anything, everything's good.
That's right. And we had friends that lived at all these different places around too. And so we would all meet up and that would just be our thing. So all of our parents had no idea where we were.
I think they did. They just stood there out of our hair.
That's right. I mean, that's just when the independence, the ability to just know that you can find your way. I think today I still have a good sense of direction and probably because of that.
Yeah.
Just a formative time and was there all the way through grade school. So
eighth grade is a difficult time to move. So you're leaving these friends you made in Greenville, your lifelong friends, and you're moving to Chattanooga. How's that work?
Well, it actually wasn't that tough for me because the interesting thing is we had friends that had moved down here. And so there were some summers that I would come down and I would spend a week at their house. And I remember loving Chattanooga.
Yeah.
Like loved it when I was a kid. And so when my parents divorced, that's where Greenville's a small town. So you just kind of have to change things up when you go through that, I'm sure, looking back as an adult on that. And that was just the place that my mother wanted to take us. She wanted to move down there and we loved it because we had friends already down here. And so it's a very weird thing for me when people ask me, where are you from? Mm-hmm. Because I've always had a connection here. And then I have a heart connection and a family home connection up there. And so I just claim everything from Northeast Tennessee to Southeast Tennessee as home.
Well, you grew up in East Tennessee. Doesn't matter if it was Northeast or Southeast.
That's right.
You've covered all, and we'll get to Thrive, but that really covers a lot, which really connects the dots of why you're doing what you're doing.
As a kid, I was lucky. It made it for an easy transition into high school with people that I knew. So I was blessed by that.
Where'd you go to high school?
So I went to Collegedale Academy.
I'm not familiar with Collegedale Academy.
It's a Seventh-day Adventist school.
Okay.
Anything about the Adventist community, we are tight-knit. I have been in the most random places in the country, and if you go to one of those churches, you're going to find someone that knows your aunt, your uncle, your brother, your sister. It's crazy. So yeah, Collegedale Academy, it's grades pre-K. I guess they have the early education as well, all the way through high school. And it's on Southern Adventist University's campus as well.
Why do you think that is a close connection with that particular religion?
I think it's because one of the big reasons there's as a kid, so there's a youth program and we call it Pathfinders. And across the country, they will have gatherings where they bring them all together. So that was our version of Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts.
Gotcha.
And so you were always, as a kid growing up, going to Camporee or going to all these different things. And so you were meeting people from all across. And then, of course, a lot of people in our denomination go to the Adventist universities. I did not. Yeah. But so they end up in these places and
they reconnect.
Mm-hmm.
So with something like the Pathfinders, were you already an outdoors person or did that really light the fire for you?
I mean, come on now. I grew up riding bikes on dirt roads.
Good point. Good point.
And going down the Nolichucky River on a float. So the
Nolichucky River. See, I don't know Upper East Tennessee. The Nolichucky, I just like the name.
And the Viking Mountains are what take you over into North Carolina. And Viking Mountains, as a kid, my dad had a Jeep and we would take the Jeep up the mountain. I can still remember being terrified when it would snow. We would get massive snows.
Yeah.
And all of his buddies would take the Jeep up the mountain. We'd be basically hanging off the side of these mountain cliffs. And I mean, that was just it. Like, I'm amazed I'm alive today.
I was going to say, glad you're here.
And in the summertime, we would go through the creeks and it just was an amazing. So yeah, the outdoors are in my blood.
So you got that in your blood growing up. And as you're thinking about going to school, Did you want to find something to do that tied into that? Because I know you went to UTC and majored in political science, and it seems kind of an anathema of what really excited you.
So I was not a superstar at science, biology, or so to me to think that environmental science or something like that that was not going to be my forte. So I sat in my history class at Collegeville Academy with Gary Pinnell, who was my teacher. And when I learned that history was really just a narrative of stories of people that had done pretty phenomenal things and could actually change things, I remember coming up to him and saying, history, this is a really cool subject. That is when I got my passion for the government process, for history. It's actually, that's a big reason why I chose UTC, because a lot of my friends, of course, were going to Southern and they didn't have a program at the time. They only had the subject of history. I wanted political science. When I saw political science was a degree, I was like, heck yeah.
Yeah, that's what I want to do. You mentioned your history teacher at Collegeville, Gary Pinnell.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people point to teachers. Is that a teacher you point back to and said, that teacher changed my life?
Remarkable. Yes. Yeah. He was absolutely pivotal in shaping that. My family's all in the medical career. So I was the oddball who didn't want to go down the medical field. Don't show me blood. Let's just be honest. And so for me to kind of figure out and navigate where my passion was, 100% Gary Pinnell.
Did your parents or your family want you to pursue a medical career, or did they say, Bridgett can't even look at blood?
I think they knew. My sister is in it, and my dad would take her to surgeries with him, and she loved it. And she would always want to learn about the bones of the body and all these things, and I never had an interest in it. So they never pushed me in that direction, and I'm grateful for that, because as a parent today, I don't want to do that to my daughters either.
Yeah, how important was that not to have that pressure?
I mean, huge, because you've got to be able to relish in your differences, and you've got to be able to understand that, I apply it today. Everybody's unique. Everybody has these unique strengths. And I know we're still on this early part, but today, for everyone that is put in my care, whether it's my children or whether it's my staff, I'm always looking for, what's your gift?
Yeah.
Because that makes you unique. Let's not put you in a pigeonhole where you're suddenly doing something that is just not your gift, because you will not succeed. And so I'm grateful for that in those formidable years. I still remember an uncle of mine giving me a hard time because I talked about early on thinking it would be great to be a lobbyist. And he was like, lobbyist, what are you thinking? And that was not a pleasant experience. But at the end of the day, what I loved about it was being able to have influence and being able to make a change happen on something you believed in. So it's neat for me to kind of look back and see why I was looking in that direction.
Well, talk about how going to UTC, political science, kind of led you to not just political work, but administrative work. And your story about Mayor Roberts.
Yeah. So I was and let me actually, this is something that you probably don't know, Mike, but
I did a lot of digging.
So my mom, she nurse midwifery. She has her master's in nurse midwifery from Emory University, and she was doing that while I was in high school. And so she was kind of commuting between Atlanta and here during that time. And when she graduated, she got a job in Merritt Island, Florida. And I had finished my freshman year at UTC, and I was really kind of pulled. Like, I don't want mom to move by herself down to Florida. So I went with her.
Mm-hmm. Are you an only child?
No. I'm the middle child, Mike. So if that explains it.
Well, I'm a middle child too, so.
I do think there's something there for that. No, everybody else, my brother and my sister went different. They were great. So I went with her, and I went to a community college that was there in Merritt Island for one semester. And then I was going to figure out what I was going to, but I felt like I needed to go with her.
You still doing political science at the community college?
No, the only thing I did there was take generals. And let me just say that during that little stint, all I wanted was to come back to Chattanooga. I wanted to be able to put on my hiking boots and come back here. And I could not stand the climate down there, and just the whole culture was so different. And so after that semester, I was like, see you, Mom, I'm gone.
You're okay.
You're all right. You got this. And she was very happy and loved it. Her office had views of, she could see the dolphins out in the ocean. Yeah. And so it was just perfect for her, not for me. So came right back to the mountains. So I had that little moment too. But I say that because UTC and Chattanooga just has always had that special place in my heart. When I was in that place where I felt like the world was mine. I could go wherever I wanted at that point. Yeah. And this is where I wanted to come back.
You probably needed that diversion to Florida to reconfirm that for you too.
To reground me in what I loved and what felt like home. And that was it. So that was my sophomore year, came back, and I had intended, it's interesting. I mean, I guess the legal side of things, like I just thought attorney, that's what you do with a political science degree. And so I had intentions of going to law school. So my focus was on law studies. So I said, I need to put my foot in the door of a law firm because I need to know if that's what I want to do. So I went to a little job board in UTC in the University Center, and I found this law firm job, and it was called Nelson, McMahon, Parker, and Noblet. I was like, okay, this sounds great. So they hired me. I was a runner. So a sophomore at UTC, I was a runner downtown.
And explain what a runner does.
Okay, so all I would do is take the papers to the courthouse, take the filing papers back and forth. Needed to put something on the docket, I'd take the papers, I'd take them to the courthouse. And then I was constantly going over to City Hall and bankruptcy court too. So I was all over in that area because I found out when I was hired there that they were also the city attorney's office. So I didn't know that when I first came on board. So every time I would go into City Hall, at the time the mayor's office was on the first floor, and I would just talk to the mayor's office. I would talk to their staff. I would talk to them. Loved it every time I went in there. And as I was leaving, I left that job because it didn't pay well, let's be honest. And so I went to serve tables instead because I could make more money that way. I had gotten my experience. Also noted, they were never leaving their office, and they were always on a computer. And I thought, how boring.
Yeah, the lawyers.
I don't think this is for me. So it was really interesting. But I was leaving class one day, and I thought, I mean, there's just one of these things, and it still drives me today. But I remember thinking, I should pop my head in and say hello. And then I thought, no, where I need to pop my head in, this is after I hadn't been working there for several months, I need to stop into City Hall. And I still remember I was on Cherry Street, and I turned the car, and I went, boom, back up to City Hall. And I walked in the door. And Shirley Pond was there. And she worked for Mayor Gene Roberts, and she looked at me, and they were so happy I stopped by, and she asked me, can you type? So there was a time when that was a skill.
Oh, yeah. I tell you what, it's one of the most important skills I ever learned was how to type.
That's right. That's right. And so, of course, I said yes. And she hired me on the spot, offered me a job, and wanted me to write letters, correspondence to constituents that were writing letters to Mayor Roberts. So amazing opportunity, worked around my classes, and I was able to spend really awesome time in a very formative point in my career and in my life to be able to watch Mayor Gene Roberts in action.
You got to learn at the foot. And really practical too, rather than running papers between the law firm and the court, you're actually in the center of where decisions are being made.
That's right. We had sister city visits, and they would have me go and welcome them. Like I was able as a sophomore, junior in college to stand up and welcome them on behalf of Chattanooga.
Oh, what a great experience.
They were giving me those experiences as I was the only student. There was not students running around at the time. Like it was just, and to take advantage of that, to say yes to that, to show up to the meetings whenever they had them, it was huge.
Did you recognize the importance of that at the time, or was it kind of like, oh, this is just what they have me do?
Oh, no, I recognized it.
And how serious did you take it?
I took it so serious. It's one of those things, I guess there's some people in college that see college experience as really a fun time to just, you're just, barely squeaking by. Not me. Like that.
So you got my transcripts?
It was I took that so serious.
Yeah. What did that teach you?
One of the most impressionable things in that time is when Mayor Roberts was working with UTC and with the county mayor on...
Was that Dalton Roberts?
It was Dalton Roberts. And so at some point, I'm not sure when when that transition happened, but they were working on the movement of UTC's football stadium into the south side of town. And so here I am, a college student. I haven't had the revitalization bug hit me yet. And I'm thinking to myself, why on earth would you want to move that over there? Because it's such an unsightly side. I didn't know the word blighted at the time, but it's a blighted district, if you want to be technical today. I didn't understand what they were doing, but I was watching everything and I was paying attention to what was happening. And I was noting that there was a vision and that the public sector could step up and be a catalyst and a movement forward in changing the trajectory of a community. And that stuck with me for the rest of my career.
And that was a pretty good fight too, wasn't it, to get it actually moved over there? Because they were playing at Chamberlain Field on campus.
On campus.
And it's, hey, we're going to build this nice new stadium over here where no one goes.
Right.
And the community was pretty divided on that, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
What got it across the finish line?
It's a good question, Mike. I was a student. I don't know. Like, I would love to, God rest his soul, I would love to sit down with Mayor Roberts and have that conversation with him. And really now looking back, reflecting back and saying, how'd you do it?
Isn't it incredible that decisions made 25, 30 years ago are really not just still having an impact, but having a full impact now? Because you look at where Finley is and First Horizon Pavilion and the things going on the South Side. If it wasn't for that initial foray, that may never have happened.
He had a vision for the whole South Side. And when my path took me in different places, one of the neatest things was coming back to Chattanooga 10 years later, driving through South Side and looking up and seeing these street signs that they had put in that had South Side etched on the metal sign and thinking, that is amazing. And there was this belief that was built in me that if you create the vision, if you have a better vision for that tomorrow, I was seeing it tangibly happen. And that was phenomenal.
Let's talk about the places your path took you. So you're working for the mayor as a college student. You get out of college, what do you do?
Well, before I got out of college, this was another one of those walking through the halls of UTC in the political science department and walking past another job board where it was showing the internship opportunity in Nashville.
Oh, that had to pique your interest.
It did. And would you believe I looked at that and I thought, they'll never pick me for that.
Don't you think most people think that, though? And to the point that they won't even apply.
That's right. That's right. They keep walking.
Yeah.
So I put my hat in the ring. And at the time, Chattanooga had held the seat of the Senate majority.
Yeah.
Leader's office.
Yeah. And that was Ward Crutchfield, right? Now, were they familiar with you because of your connection with City Hall or?
Yes, but I knew him because he was always coming in to the mayor's office. But that wasn't even, it was all selected through UTC and through, Crutchfield's office was just getting an intern. So they didn't have any hand in that.
And Ward Crutchfield, he was really a throwback to the classic politician.
He was.
Yeah. He was out meeting and greeting people every day and happy to see him and shaking hands and kissing babies. Every
day. And so that's why it's fascinating. I look back, he was always in the mayor's office, just always there. He was always around. And then in Nashville, that's what they told me. The mayor's office, they said, you need to get into the Senate Majority Leader's office. And that's just going to be an incredible opportunity. So that was the office I picked because I could pick an office. I could pick which one I wanted to intern for. So that was kind of neat. But yeah, what an experience.
Yeah.
I said, and I sure wish I had, this is another one of those, I thought I need to write a book because every day there was a story and I wanted to write those stories down. of just the way he interacted, the way he led, the way, I mean, this was before phones. This is before you had videos of, I mean, there was no, the way the legislature was such a different place.
Yeah. It's more about relationships, wasn't it?
It was all a relationship. So you had a Republican governor with Democratic chairs of committees. You had Democratic lieutenant governor. I guess he was the one, he would assign the chairs, of course, for the committees, and he would assign Republicans to that. And so...
Wait a second.
Yeah.
There was bipartisan cooperation?
It was so bipartisan. It was so bipartisan. It's crazy.
They actually got along?
They got along. They were friends.
What kind of backwards world is this?
And we used to talk about how Washington was so different because it was so partisan.
Yeah.
And so being there at that time, you just did not have that partisanship. I mean, it was a neat time to be there.
Yeah.
For me, because even though I'm political science, I am not partisan.
Yeah. Well, we got stuff to do.
There isn't a bone of partisanship in me. And so for me, I wanted to be able to get things done. And I loved being able to do that.
And you did that for a year?
I did that. Well, yes, for that legislative session.
But that led to what in Nashville?
So I came back to graduate.
Yeah.
And while I was back here, it was interesting because it was Senator Crutchfield's office came to do some meetings here. And along with them was Connie Hardin, who was Legislative Budget Analysis Director. And they introduced me. And again, one of those moments, everything is about these moments. I was invited to this meeting, had nothing. I don't even remember what my job was at the time, probably a server again, just in the last 6 months, coming back from Nashville and then just trying to graduate. And so as I went, I thought, I'm going to show up. I got to show up again. And when I show up, here they are. I get to meet Connie. Connie says, I'm looking for a research analyst. And she says, let's talk. And so I do an interview with her because she found out I was graduating that December and I get hired. So again, because I showed up, came into the room, met the people, just take the initiative, people.
Well, and that's an extremely important point, the just showing up. Someone, I forget where I heard, 80% of life is just showing up, because if you don't show up, you're never going to get the opportunity. And I think the other point in your story is that, you may have just been a server, but you've made these connections and those opportunities come your way, and you've got to be able to be willing to walk through that door.
Oh, you got to be so willing. You got to be willing. And let me just say, I don't want to downplay being a server either, because that is where I learned how to talk to people I don't know.
Yep.
I still remember walking up to the first table and thinking, I could say hello. Like, that was just awkward for me. And that was a growing experience too. So I've always seen those experiences as, what are you getting out of this? And how is it helping you to grow as a person and definitely in your profession? So being able to walk into a room that Crutchfield's office was coming in and doing these meetings at, and just walking into that room and then getting to meet my future boss, who was the first out of college job, that was amazing.
Did you have an innate confidence, or is that something that you had to grow?
I had to grow that.
Were you naturally an outgoing type person, or again, did you have to kind of adjust your sails and learn to be more proactive?
I was very outgoing in high school. In college, I was more reserved, which is really interesting because of the professional opportunities that I found. I would connect more with the adults than I would with the fellow classmates, which was really interesting.
Was it almost, in a sense, being in a room you didn't think you should be in?
Possibly.
And deferring to more experience and leadership, and just kind of sitting, listening and observing. And
soaking it in. Exactly.
Soaking it in is a better way to put it.
You got to soak it in. You got to be able to absorb it first so that you can figure out how you feel about it and what opinions you do have about it before you put that out there.
Yeah. And I do think the mistake a lot of people make is not taking the time to soak it in and understand it, and putting it out there where everyone goes, who the heck is this?
That's right. That's right. So that one situation, walking back into the room, meeting my future boss, led me right back to Nashville. So I went right back to Nashville. Then I graduated, had the job waiting for me, and went and worked at the legislature. And what I loved about that is it was a nonpartisan. We worked for both the House and the Senate, and we worked for both parties.
So you were kind of like the Congressional Budget Office who
Yes.
takes the bills and scores the bills and says, you know what, this is a great bill, but it's going to cost $18 billion.
Sort of. That can be fiscal review committee. So we were the ones who were taking the governor's budget and analyzing it.
Oh, okay.
So we would take the budget, analyze it. What were the improvements that he was putting in? So things really kicked up in January and February when the budget was released. And then the legislators who don't have their own individual staff doing this work. This is, again, one of those things we think when they get put into office, in any office, that they have all this knowledge about everything. No, they don't. And so they're only as knowledgeable as the knowledge that they're given and the time that they have to put into it. And that was really fun for me because we were able to be the researchers on the back end to understand the changes in the budget, to help make those recommendations and help to share with them what it was for. And when all of the agencies would come before the Finance, Ways and Means Committee, we were there to help guide the chair and others on questions and things to help kind of probe and understand what it was so that you could be a good steward of the taxpayer dollars that were coming through the state on all of these different recommendations. So that was a really interesting time, too, because you became a policy expert on budgetary things. And then when you weren't in session, you were doing ad hoc committees, TDOT being one, because you had the legislature at the time was so upset because all they saw were orange cones across the state. And they wanted to understand that. So we went into a full ad hoc session throughout the summer and off session time to dig into all the intricacies of DOT.
They pulled the curtain back for you.
They did.
And you got to see how the sausage was made.
Oh, and to be clear, this is also, I was there during the time when the Republican governor put forth a state income tax proposal.
As Don Sundquist.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so the Democratic controlled legislature was coming up with a backup plan if the state income tax didn't pass. And so our office was there to support all of the leaders, Republican and Democrats in the legislature, to come up with their alternative budget. So we had to come up with an alternative budget that if that didn't pass, where was the additional dollars going to come from? What programs were you going to cut? It was a pretty incredible time to be there.
Yeah, and it was a pretty contentious time in the state, too. There's a lot of arguments going back and forth. It sounds like you could have been just as happy staying in public administration your entire career, but you end up with something like the Thrive Regional Partnership. And I would imagine if you were going to stay in the public administration side, you probably need an advanced degree, a master's degree.
That's right. Because what I figured out during that time is I loved the process. I definitely knew that I was never going to run for office. That was not the side of things I wanted to be on.
Never say never.
Mike, I wanted to be the one behind the scenes that was giving the information and helping to make them look good.
You mean the power?
That's true. So I made that moment. I also figured out I don't want to do law. I didn't want to do that. And so I had a calendar on my desk and it had all these quotes. And one day I flipped the calendar and this is after session. And to be clear, when you weren't in session at that time, I don't know what it's like now, it was pretty slow.
Yeah.
And again, state employee, so you're watching the clock. And so it just wasn't fueling my soul like I wanted it to. But I saw this quote and it said, "Get up off your knowledge and go do something with it." I had 5.5 years of experience at the legislature at that time. I had learned policy. I had learned so many things. But what I wanted was to be able to roll up my sleeves and start getting immersed in communities and getting immersed in the work and not seeing it from the 50,000-foot view. Mm-hmm. And community development was my passion.
How'd you end up at ETSU?
I did so much research on where to go to get your master's and even looked at Vanderbilt's program, but also said, if I'm going to go into public administration, that's going to be a bill I don't want to take on. So yeah. I was being very thoughtful in that approach. Also, looked at different institutions and literally stumbled on the fact that ETSU had a master's in planning administration with a planning and development concentration. And knowing that I wanted to do planning and development, thought that my goal was to come back to the Department of Economic and Community Development and do more hands-on work in economic development at the time.
On like a statewide basis?
Which still, I felt like that might be more hands-on, but I didn't know what I wanted.
Yeah.
I allowed those choices to kind of play out because that's not where my path led me. But at the time, that was my plan.
So you get back to East Tennessee, you're at ETSU, you're going for your master's in public administration. How does the Johnson City Development Authority come about?
So at the time, I'm 28, and I've, starting from my sophomore year in college, had been doing work, even while during school. So there was no way I was just going to go be a grad student and not work. So
You like a challenge.
I do. So I believe it was posted as a graduate level internship. So here I am at 28 thinking, I just came out of the legislature. I don't need an internship. They did tell me that I was required to have one. And I kept saying, but I have 5.5 years. So put my pride in my pocket.
Which is an important thing to be able to make that decision. Yeah, because a lot of people go,
Yeah.
heck with them.
Yeah. Pride in the pocket and going, okay, I got more to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is, I have more to learn.
Yeah.
So because of planning and development, I wanted to learn about economic development tools to do downtown development. Didn't know I had a passion for downtown development. I was driving through downtown Johnson City. I started looking up and I saw this beauty at the tops of these buildings. And I was reminded and resonant, everything from my time in Chattanooga was coming back to me. And I remembered, hey, there's hope. There's hope here. Because think about it, during that time period too, Chattanooga's transformation was already happening.
Yeah.
So now I was seeing this place that I was in being transformed. And now I'm in this Johnson City and I'm seeing this future that could happen. So found Johnson City Development Authority and went to work there just as a graduate student and to work on, at the time, a tax increment financing plan because they were looking at doing that. And so I was doing that part-time while working on, that was my master's thesis as well. Their executive director left and the board said, Bridgett, would you please come in as our interim executive director?
Now you're the intern.
Correct.
Wow. How did you take that? I mean, yes, excited, flattered, but
Of course.
a bit of intimidation?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. I believe it was during budget time too. And I still remember the president of the chamber at the time. He said when he saw me get up to make that pitch to the city council, who was very hard to do. That was not an easy thing because the Johnson City Development Authority at the time was not very favorable because downtown was not a popular place. There was not vision for it. There was not.
And why do we have this authority that we're funding if they haven't done anything to make it
That's right.
better?
It's this awful, terrible place. What are we doing? And I got up there and I still remember him saying, when I saw you stand up at the podium, I thought, that's our director. That's our executive director. And let me just let the record reflect. When I was at the legislative budget office, we were never allowed to stand up at the podium and speak on behalf of anything. We were always in the backdrop. So I did not have experience standing at the podium.
Yeah.
But I had watched it long enough and I knew how to do it. And so when they asked me to do it, there's no hesitation. I just stand right up. I did it and we got the budget.
No fear of speaking in public, no fear of...
I would say that fear was leaned into
Yeah.
to get to that point where it became comfortable.
So you're 28, right? 29 when this happens?
Yeah.
Did you sit back and go, oh my goodness, I can't believe this, or, okay, this is cool. Let's go forward.
Absolutely. Both.
Yeah.
Because that's also a time where I was, there were no, I wasn't surrounded by a lot of women at that time. So women I was sitting around tables with men in that leadership position too. Not only that, but I'm 28.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine those rooms are a bunch of guys that look like me, 60-year-old white males.
Yes.
They go, who's this over here? Bridgett?
Yes. It was definitely, you had to fight your way into proving yourself. And I was ready for it. And I was up for it.
Did they challenge you to see if you would stand up for yourself?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my word, yes.
What did that look like?
Well, there would be times where they would say, you don't need to bring a board member with you. You can come and have this meeting. We just need to talk about. So that was while we were working on doing some pretty awesome transformational approaches to tax increment financing. So Johnson City is one that really took the lead on a way that hasn't been used that way often across the state of Tennessee, because of some things that I did that I was able to take from my time at the legislature. So as I was working on that, I'm trying to educate county commissioners on what it means.
Who, kind of back to your legislative about state reps and state senators, really don't know everything. They're elected into a position. They got, so you're to a great degree educating them to these systems.
That's right. That's right. And completely enjoyed every minute of it, because if I believe something is going to be good for a part of a community that is really hurting and suffering, I am going to fight for that. And so that was fun for me, was to educate them on, no, you're not going to pay more taxes. No, you're not going to have an increase on what you already pay. Like all of the educational tools behind it, I completely enjoyed it. And for the county commission standpoint, for them to understand they weren't collecting anything from that part of town anyway.
Yeah.
So the only way they were going to have hope is if you put a tool and incentive in place that wasn't going to cost them anything, but was going to have so much to gain at the end of the life of it because of what that tool could do.
And was the Southside Project in the back of your mind?
Yes. And I think that's where it was frustrating, because I had just been in a situation, and I think it is such a unique and beautiful thing about Chattanooga, and it is truly the Chattanooga way, is the public-private partnership, the ability to work together and to vision together and to move things forward together. And so I was really missing that at that time. There wasn't that vision.
Yeah.
So there would be personal attacks on me. I want to meet with you without the board, literally asking you questions just
to trip you up.
Just to trip you up.
Yeah. So, but you had success in getting things done in Johnson City, and you had a encounter with someone running for U.S. Senate.
Oh, yes.
Talk about that.
So obviously, Chattanooga's always been there.
Yeah, it kind of floats up in everything that I've
circled around it, even from my childhood days.
Yeah.
So even though I was in Nashville, I was always coming back to Chattanooga every weekend. This was my weekend getaway. And I would come down here every weekend. So I was seeing the transformation happening. And at the time, Mayor Corker had gotten into office. And so I was keeping up with all of these great things that were happening while I was in Nashville working. And then even when I went to Johnson City. And I had seen at that time now some amazing things happen with the vision and the leadership that at the time Mayor Corker had done for Chattanooga. And I still remember him pushing forward the bold vision for the 21st century riverfront and thinking, holy cow, like that is massive. That is huge. That is bold. And he's just saying, we're going to make it happen, and we're going to raise these millions of dollars to make it happen.
And that was always his style. Be bold or go home.
Be bold or go home. Oh, man. And so I saw that in action. And so there were times that I would exhibit that type of boldness, not to the multi-million-dollar level of a project, but exhibit that boldness to leaders in Chattanooga or in Johnson City that needed to see what was possible. And you just had to cast that vision. So now you have this running for U.S. Senate, Bob Corker, that is going across the state. And he comes to Johnson City. And I need to find the photograph, because it's one of those photographs where it's me and, yes, a bunch of men standing around, walking him through downtown. And I'm standing there with him, and there is just gravel, there's construction, there's all these things happening. It's just not looking, it's just all up in an uproar. And I'm pointing and I'm showing him and I'm saying, this is what this is going to be. And this is what this is going to be. And I'm laying out this future vision for what we were going to do in downtown Johnson City. And I just remember that moment and thinking how cool that someone that made such an impact in my life is able to come here, and now I can even act as if it's happening in Johnson City, knowing it was going to, and to be able to kind of apply that back. And it was just an amazing moment for me, again, in my professional background, just to know I had that moment with him.
Yeah, that had to be really fulfilling.
It was.
I don't want to gloss over going to Michigan and that, but I got to get you back to Chattanooga at some point. Talk a little bit about leaving Johnson City, going to Michigan because for your husband's divinity degree, and then Georgia. And then let's talk about what attracted you to Thrive.
So in that time, I met my husband right after I moved to Northeast Tennessee. So I had spent all that time being the single independent woman for 10 years now, just boom. Then I meet my husband, and he's a pastor. And there was this moment where it was time when we got married, and another year passed, and it was time for him to go up to Michigan, again, part of our church, Andrews University. They're the only place where you can get your master's in divinity in our church. So we had to move to Michigan. And that is, again, it's a zigzag.
Yeah.
Your career, if you think today that you know exactly where it's going to be 20, 30 years from now, just laugh about that. Just laugh. So I had that moment of I'd never been the trailing spouse. What on earth is happening? Yeah. And I knew that this is where we needed to go. But
that had to be hard.
It was incredibly hard.
Because you were making a lot of decisions that just affected you.
Just affected me all the way up to the point of meeting Chris.
Yeah.
And knowing that Chris was the right person at the right time. I believe that's fully why I was drawn to ECSU. I wouldn't have met him if I hadn't moved back. So it's amazing to think of how all those turns take you. But when we moved, I made this decision. And there's a quote that I used to use at, even through all the downtown revitalization things, it's Rosabeth Moss Cantor, who is a professor and an amazing leader from Harvard Business School. And she says, I kind of paraphrase it a little bit from what the actual quote is, but I'm always saying change is debilitating when done to you, but exhilarating when done by you.
I like that.
And I knew I could either embrace that or I could let it debilitate me because I felt like, we're not going to be there long. What am I even going to do? So for the first time in my career, I had a moment to be able to do something that I'd never thought of doing before. And it was to just start going out on my own again and consulting. And so when we moved to Michigan, I was able to still keep my connections back in Tennessee. And because of what we had accomplished in Johnson City with the tax increment financing process and with turning that community into a Main Street community for the first time, I was able to do consulting work in Kingsport and in Greenville. And it ended up being all the way up to Belfast, Maine, and helping to support communities with their economic development efforts.
But you kept a connection here to particularly East Tennessee.
Everything kept in Tennessee. Yeah.
And you eventually get back to the South.
Come back to the South, which as a pastor, they place you.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted him to have a 2-church district, and they put us in Adairsville, Georgia.
Which isn't too far from here.
Not far at all. So we were happy with that. And so we were in Northwest Georgia, which is really cool now because of the work that we do at Thrive. I have a Northwest Georgia connection because I lived there. Little did I know that was going to help play out as well. But during that time, I did consulting work with the National Main Street Center and did a contract with Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. So again, thought that's why I was going to graduate school, but hold on, Bridgett, because that's going to come a few years later. And was able to help them create the Tennessee Downtowns program during that time. So had twin babies, did all of that while doing all of that. And just for 5 years, did that work for communities. I think what's the number? It's like 45 communities that I worked in during that time.
Wow. It's a lot. And
then Chris got the call to come here. So he is now the chaplain at Collegedale Academy. So again, full circle.
Yeah.
Who knew? And
Your
I said,
old high school.
Yes, we're going back. Spent that next year still doing the consulting work and realized I didn't want to be traveling with my girls, who were 2 at the time, and read about Thrive in the newspaper.
So it was an article about Thrive, and you say, you know what? That's right up my alley.
It was a job posting.
Oh, it was a job posting.
I didn't even know anything more than the job posting, which was looking for a project manager to lead this effort that was going to, and I quote, proactively engage the people of the region in creating an action plan that would make the most of their economic opportunities while preserving what we love about our home communities. And it was plural. And it was all about this place that I had always called home, and it was plural. And I now had seen, this was in 2012, how much had changed here over that time. And again, change is debilitating when done to you, but exhilarating when done by you. So how can we make that change exhilarating instead of debilitating?
And originally it was Thrive 2055.
It was the planning process.
Yes.
And I still remember, so the Chattanooga Chamber was the fiduciary agent. I didn't know this. I knew it was a Chattanooga Chamber posting. I loved that because I knew that it was going to be business-led, business, public, private it wasn't going to be a public sector led effort. It had to be both. And I loved that about that. But I had no idea. I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
And this was an initiative driven by Tom Ed Wilson to a great degree, isn't that true?
That's exactly right. And understanding it was after Volkswagen had come into the region. So again, if you look where Collegedale is, that is right there where so all of the changes that had already happened since Volkswagen came, I was seeing that transformation happen as well. So
for those who aren't familiar with Thrive Regional Partnership, give the thumbnail. I know it started as an initiative of the Chamber where they brought you in as the program manager or program director, but it's really evolved into a separate organization where you're now the executive director and president of it. Can you touch on just how that process worked?
Absolutely. So I think even at the time, the project management team, that's what they were called, that did the hiring. It was made up of a lot of different entities across the region. So the chamber served as the fiduciary agent for the program, but everyone was all a part of it. Such an interesting progression. And so they titled that position project manager. It was the only staff. It was the person that was going to be managing the consultant contract that had already been secured, as well as at the time the coordinating committee. And so getting into that was, wow, this is pretty massive. So we built it over time with the planning process that I just kind of shepherded as we didn't have our own independent identity. After we got through the planning process in 3 years, we launched a kind of an executive committee to look at the sustainability of the plan. And so in 2016, the end of 2016, 2017, we became an independent, incorporated nonprofit organization. And at that point became independent of the chamber, moved out into its own standalone entity, created the board of trustees. And that is the point where I was now the president and CEO. So if you really want to put it in nonprofit terms, I'm the founding president and CEO of the organization. And the organization came out of a planning effort that was started back in 2012. So we are now been at it for 12 years. Everything that we are doing is truly to inspire responsible growth. We do it through conversation, connection, and collaboration. And we wake up every day making sure that as we grow in our population, in our industry, that we are not losing the unique identity, the unique sense of place, the unique landscapes, and the unique culture that we all love about this place. We are such a beautiful place, this entire region. And so what are we doing to make sure that we don't let change debilitate us? What are we doing to make sure that we don't become that place that someone says, I could never move there because of the traffic, because we haven't put thoughtfulness into how we're handling the growth as it happens.
Where can people go if they want to learn more about Thrive and what you're doing and support it? Where can they find out more?
thriveregionalpartnership.org. And if that's too long, you can put in thriveregion.org and it'll get you there too.
Oh, easy enough. Well, before I get to the last question, I need to thank our sponsor, Tennessee Valley Authority, for sponsoring My Morning Cup. You can follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service and visit TVA.com/do good here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. Last question for you. What would you tell your 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
Stay so rooted in what matters most and allow that to be the guide instead of an arbitrary plan that you think you might have for the future. Because if you get too connected to the arbitrary, this is what I want to do, you're going to say no to opportunities that will literally change your life. That 25-year-old self just didn't know. I mean, I hadn't gone to graduate school. I didn't know I was planted in this place.
So you weren't 25 years old thinking, I'm going to run Thrive when I'm 25.
No, this was the best thing I ever landed on. And people always ask, well, what was your career to get you to this job? It's like, it's a windy path of a lot of experiences and a lot of life that has brought me here. And it's only because following that passion and following where that kind of calling is, can really lead you into a future that will absolutely knock you off your feet and surprise you.
And I think that's an important thing that you and your career path shows, is that you've never let go of your passion. The jobs really didn't matter. It's the passion for what you had.
It's that root in the values. What really lights your fire?
Yeah.
If it lights your fire, it's going to change everything. And if you don't, that was like the get up off your knowledge and go do something about it moment. If you don't, go change it. Change, you got to embrace. You do not let it debilitate you. You embrace it. And that is a skill you have to learn and lean into, but you only learn it by leaning into it.
That's a great message. I've so enjoyed the conversation. You've got not just a great message, but great lessons for everyone. Thanks for coming in and sharing.
Thank you, Mike. I enjoyed this.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.